Macedonian leader Alexander the Great gets a lot of attention for marching his grand army throughout much of the ancient world, but maintaining that empire over time across vast continent-spanning domains was a very different challenge. The whole project started to come apart shortly after his death at the tender age of 32. And what came in his wake? Well, today, we're looking at the rise and fall of the Seleucid Empire, the successors to Alexander the Great. But before we take you back to ancient Greece, make sure you subscribe to the Weird History channel, then head to the comments and let us know what other classical empires you'd like to hear about next. Alright, let's run down a Seleucid on foot. During Alexander's brief but eventful life, he united various Greek states in a pan-Hellenic conquest of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. After overthrowing Persian king Darius III, Alexander's empire stretched from the Adriatic Sea in the west to the Indus River in the east. He died in June 323 BCE in the ancient city of Mesopotamia, which he had hoped to use as the capital for his new empire. Talk about a downgrade. The conquered area Alexander left behind was culturally and politically divided, and he died without a clearly established heir. Roxana, Alexander's widow, was pregnant, but it was unclear if her baby was going to be a son, considering ultrasound machines were still a few thousand years off. The situation almost immediately descended into infighting, with various rival generals and factions maneuvering for control of the new Macedonian Empire. This led to a period in Greek history known as the Diadochi, lasting from Alexander's death to around 281 BCE, during which his empire was carved up into a variety of separate kingdoms, like a giant earthy pie. Among the first to confront the post-Alex power vacuum was a cavalry commander known as Perdiccas, and we're sure he got really mad if you chuckled at his name. He argued that no decision should be made until Roxana could give birth to Alexander's potential heir, and that Alex's half-brother Philip III Aridaeus should rule temporarily until the baby was born. Perdiccas' plan was put into action, but it was short-lived, and patience wasn't really the order of the day. Attempts by Perdiccas himself to consolidate power, potentially via a marriage to Alexander's sister Cleopatra, were viewed skeptically by many of his rivals, and the jockeying for position continued in spite of the overarching plan. One of these rival generals was Seleucus, the son of Macedonian nobles who had risen through Alexander's army starting from the lowly rank of page. Legend has it he actually ripped himself out of a book. He accompanied Alexander and his armies into Asia in the spring of 334 BCE when he was only 23 years old. By the time of the Indian campaigns of 327, Seleucus was already leading an elite infantry corps known as the Hypaspestai, or Silver Shields, which sounds like your favorite 2000s garage band. Seleucus also took part in Alexander's great marriage ceremony in the Persian city of Susa in 324. The goal of this undertaking was to unite the Greek and Persian cultures into one cohesive empire by marrying Greek generals to noble Persian wives. Seleucus married a Persian woman named Apama, and though most of his fellow generals divorced their so-called Susa wives as soon as Alexander left this planet, Seleucus remained married to Apama for the remainder of his life. Together they had a son and heir, Antiochus I Soter, and at least 2 daughters. Apparently they stopped counting. Around the year 322, another of Alexander's generals named Ptolemy stole the late emperor's body on its way back to Macedonia, as a direct challenge to the new ruling order. And we admit, that's a hell of a challenge. Not wanting to be the dude who lost Alexander's body, Perdiccas sent out an expedition to retrieve it. At this moment, Seleucus sensed Perdiccas' weakness and switched sides. Around 321, he teamed with another general, Antigenes, and a former bodyguard of Alexander's named Python in a successful plot to whack Perdiccas. It was very pro-wrestling. In exchange for his role in the plot, Seleucus was named a satrap, basically the Macedonian version of a governor, overseeing the wealthy province of Babylon. His co-conspirator, Antigenes, was rewarded with nearby Susiana, while Python received the bordering province of Media. But despite these rewards, Seleucus now had a big old target on his back in this chaotic post-Alexander landscape, and began to fear for his life. So he fled to Egypt for the protection of his ally, Ptolemy the body thief. There, his friend furnished him with an army, including 800 infantry members and 200 cavalry. In 311 BCE, Seleucus returned to Babylon, using it as a base of operation for expansion. And it was around 307 that the ever-humble Seleucus founded the self-named city of Seleucia on the shores of the Tigris River and made it his new capital, officially kicking off the Seleucid Empire. The so-called Babylonian Wars, in which Seleucus defended and expanded his territory, continued through 302 BCE. It ended with most of the eastern flank of Alexander's former empire under Seleucus control. Around this time, many of Seleucus's rival generals dug in their heels and started securing their holdings rather than expanding. And in another bid for stability, many of the former satraps, including Ptolemy, Lysimachus, Cassander, and Agathocles, now started referring to themselves as kings. Apparently, you can just do that. Give it a try, king. With his western border relatively secured, Seleucus turned his attention to the east. A number of former territories that had been claimed by Alexander's Macedonian army, most of them in present-day Afghanistan, were now under the control of Emperor Chandragupta Maurya of the aptly named Mauryan Empire. Hey, people were doing empires back then. What? It's believed that around 306 BCE, Seleucus personally traveled to present-day Afghanistan and possibly as far as India to oversee the campaigns against the Mauryans. The exact nature of the conflict and how it shook out remains a mystery, but it's not believed that Seleucus had a tremendous military success here. The two leaders ultimately signed a treaty in 303, but Seleucus essentially abandoned these territories over time as they were too difficult to secure. But there was a bright side to the campaign. As part of the peace treaty, Chandragupta rewarded Seleucus with 500 war elephants, which certainly proved useful in later military campaigns, particularly the defeat of his old rival Antigonus at the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE. An elephant never forgets, but it often fights. In 292, Seleucus named his firstborn son Antiochus I as his co-ruler and viceroy of the eastern provinces of his government. By this point, only two of Seleucus's former rivals, Lysimachus and Ptolemy, remained viable threats, and both of them were on their way out. Ptolemy died of old age around January 282, while Lysimachus was clipped in the Battle of Corupedium in 281. Seleucus was the last man standing from Alexander's original lineup of generals and successors. In other words, he won the Squid Game. But his victory was short-lived. Leaving his son to rule his Asian empire, Seleucus intended to travel back to Thrace and Macedonia and live out his days in the kingdom of his birth. But before he could arrive home, he was taken out by Ptolemy's eldest son and heir, known as Ptolemy Kourounos, in 281. Hope his tickets were refundable. Though Seleucus and Ptolemy had largely been allies, their successors did not get along nearly as well. Antiochus I and his son Antiochus II fought repeated wars with Ptolemy's successors, particularly Ptolemy II Philadelphus, over territory in Syria. They also faced an invasion of Asia Minor, part of modern-day Turkey, from both the Gauls and the Celts, which was a complicated and ongoing distraction. With so many skirmishes to fight, Antiochus II lacked the time and ability to hold together the vast eastern portion of his empire. Toward the end of his reign, a number of provinces started to rebel and claim their independence. Ultimately, the entire region fell to an invasion of Pami of Arsaces and became part of the newly formed Parthian Empire. Things were looking grim. But the story of the Seleucid Empire doesn't end there. Antiochus II was succeeded by Seleucus II Callinicus, whose reign was marked by more military losses and provincial defections. But Seleucus II's younger son, Antiochus III, took the throne in 223 BCE, and spoiler alert, they sometimes call him Antiochus III the Great. He led the way to a revival of the empire that spanned another 30 years. After taking power, Antiochus III spent 10 years traveling around the eastern parts of the empire, normalizing relations with the local governors and squashing rebellions. Like the original Seleucus, he also traveled to India, where he met with King Saphagasenus and received more war elephants as part of their ongoing treaty. It's good to have friends in high places. Literal high places, because he was on top of an elephant. Additionally, Antiochus III was able to oust Ptolemy V from Syria, completing a long-term dynastic goal and functionally restoring the Seleucid kingdom to its former glory, and finally getting revenge on that backstabbing body thief. Sort of. Encouraged by the exiled Carthaginian general Hannibal, whom we hear also enjoyed elephants, Antiochus III next set his sights on Greece itself. However, he ran into a greater force than he'd challenged up until this point, the expanding Roman Republic. Antiochus suffered major losses at the Battle of Thermopylae in Magnesia, and was ultimately forced to sign a treaty promising never again to expand his empire's territory west of the Taurus Mountains, in what is today southern Turkey. The Seleucids were also forced to pay the Romans a large indemnity, essentially a fine, which economically crippled the burgeoning empire. Antiochus perished in 187 BCE on an expedition to the east, in which he was attempting to raise funds to pay off the Romans. His son, Seleucus IV, spent his entire reign working to pay down the Roman debt before getting whacked by one of his own ministers. Seleucus IV's successor was Antiochus IV, and by now you've probably spotted the dynasty's naming strategy. Antiochus IV planned to restore the Seleucid Empire to glory by conquering the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. There was just one problem. The Romans said no, and he didn't dare defy them. On his way home, presumably while the sad piano music from Peanuts played softly in the background, Antiochus IV made a side trip to Judea and rage-conquered Jerusalem. His brutal rule over the city inspired a rebellion known as the Maccabean Revolt, which inspired the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, which commemorates the rededication of Jerusalem's temple in opposition to Seleucid rule. The Seleucid power structure didn't really survive Antiochus IV's death in 164 BCE. The remainder of the empire's tenure is marked by constant civil wars and power struggles. The empire was even temporarily controlled by a man named Alexander Ballas, an impostor who claimed to be Antiochus IV's son. At the same time, more territories and provinces were declaring independencies or assimilating into surrounding empires. By the year 100 BCE, the entire Seleucid Empire consisted of the city of Antioch and a few other Syrian towns. A small revival was orchestrated in 69 BCE by Antiochus XIII, but he was taken out by a Syrian chieftain in 64. His death is often considered the formal end to the Seleucid Empire. Now, if only we could find Alex's body. So what do you think? Were Alexander's successors equally great, or did they just make a great mess? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from Our Weird History.